My son, Austin, had the audacity to sell my home for a shocking $1.2 million without ever telling me a thing. He then insultingly handed me a check for a measly $15,000 and suggested I go buy myself a room in some rundown place on the outskirts of town. He clearly saw me as a helpless old man, but all I could do was laugh in his face. He had no idea what I had secretly done just days earlier. The front door slammed shut behind him, the force of it making the old house tremble. Austin was standing there in my living room, and the afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows I had just cleaned glinted off the expensive Italian leather of his briefcase. His charcoal suit probably cost more than my entire monthly grocery budget. With no greeting or explanation, he hit me with the shocking news that he had sold the house. It felt like being doused with ice water. In just 4 words, my entire world had been turned upside down. Still trying to comprehend his words, I looked up from the newspaper. As I asked him to explain what he meant, I saw his jaw clench before he pulled a thick stack of legal documents from his briefcase. The papers made a rustling sound as he dropped them onto the coffee table, right on top of the crossword puzzle I had been working on. I noticed the glint of his gold watch as he reached for his expensive pen. He stated that the deeds had already been transferred and that the settlement had been finalized yesterday. His voice was filled with the same cold, businesslike efficiency he used with his clients. He told me he had prepared everything I needed to know. My hands trembled as I reached for the documents. The letterhead was from Morrison & Associates Real Estate, and below it, in bold, black letters, were the words Final Sale Agreement, 847 Maple Street. That was our address, the home I had lived in for 30 years. I started to protest, telling him he couldn't just do this, but he cut me off. He reminded me with practiced indifference that he was the legal owner. He had a point. I had signed the house over to him 3 years ago for tax purposes. The memory of it hit me like a physical blow. I had trusted him completely back then. My accountant had suggested the transfer to help with estate planning, and Austin had promised that nothing would change, saying it was just paperwork. He made a point of reminding me that he had said many things back then. He then pulled out his checkbook, the leather cover worn smooth from frequent use. He wanted me to know he wasn't heartless and was generously giving me $15,000. He tore off the check with a sharp rip and placed it on top of the legal documents. The amount seemed to mock me from the pale blue paper. $15,000 for the house where he had grown up, where I had raised him after his mother died, and where I had sacrificed everything to give him opportunities. Austin continued, telling me about a place he had found for me. He described it as a small, inexpensive apartment on the outskirts of town and suggested it was perfect for someone in my situation. The words, my situation, came out of me as a whisper. He then clicked his briefcase shut and told me to be realistic. He explained that at 65, I was retired and living on Social Security, and that I couldn't maintain the house anymore. The roof needed work, and the plumbing was ancient, so this was a way for me to get a fresh start without the burden. The word burden echoed in my head like a tolling bell. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling unsteady beneath me. This house wasn't a burden. It was my home. Austin told me it was an expense I couldn't afford. As he straightened his tie, a gesture I remembered from his childhood whenever he was lying about breaking something, he told me that he and Sarah had been discussing this for months, and that they both agreed it was the best solution for everyone. Sarah, of course, was involved. His wife had been pushing him to distance himself from me ever since they got married. I had seen her calculating gaze at every family dinner, every holiday gathering. The way she looked at everything I owned, it was as if she were already dividing it all up. My voice was rising now, a culmination of 30 years of suppressed frustration breaking through. I asked how exactly throwing his own father out of his home benefited everyone. His expression didn't change. If anything, he seemed bored by my emotional response. He told me I was being dramatic and that it was a business decision. He mentioned the house was worth $400,000 and that, after paying off the remaining mortgage and expenses, he would be left with about $350,000. He believed that giving me $15,000 of that was more than generous. My face was burning, and my hands clenched into fists. He was taking my home and giving me pocket change, yet he called it generous. He calmly stated that I was getting a free place to live and cash in hand. He glanced at his watch again, telling me that most people would be grateful. Grateful? I thought. After everything I had done for him? After working 2 jobs to pay for his college, after going without vacations, new clothes, and decent food so he could have piano lessons, soccer camps, and the best of everything? I had sacrificed everything for him, and this was how he was repaying me. Austin finally showed some emotion, irritation. He stated that it was my choice and that he never asked me to sacrifice anything. Breathing hard, I stopped myself from telling him how ungrateful he was and just told him to get out. Fine, he replied, picking up his briefcase, completely unmoved by my anger. He told me I had 30 days to vacate and that the new owners wanted possession by mid-May. He walked toward the door with the same casual confidence he had entered with, pausing only to look back over his shoulder. He told me to try to be practical about it, that fighting it wouldn't change anything, since the papers were already signed. The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving me alone with the legal documents and that insulting check. Through the window, I watched him climb into his BMW, the engine purring to life like a satisfied cat. He didn't look back at our house, as he drove away. I sank back into my chair, staring at the check in my hands. The $15,000 felt lighter than air, yet somehow carried the weight of 30 years of betrayal. Austin had no idea, none whatsoever, what that number represented. The graduation photo on my mantelpiece caught my eye, showing Austin in his cap and gown, grinning beside his Stanford diploma. I remembered writing those tuition checks with aching clarity. $45,000 per year every semester, for a total of $180,000. Back then, I had worked 16-hour days managing 3 car wash locations personally. My hands were perpetually dry from soap and chemicals, and my back ached from bending over engines. But Austin needed the best education money could buy. He would call every few weeks, casual as ordering coffee, asking for money for books, for a laptop, or for a fraternity networking event. I had granted each request without hesitation, and each sacrifice was made gladly. Moving to my desk, I pulled out the bottom drawer where I kept old financial records. There it was, the folder labeled Austin's Business Investment, containing documentation of the $75,000 I had given him. I had liquidated my emergency savings in 2019 when he had pitched his revolutionary consulting concept. He had promised me he would pay me back within 2 years, and the check had cleared on a Tuesday. The promise had evaporated like morning fog. My fingers traced through more documents, including annual statements showing regular transfers of $15,000 every December for 15 consecutive years. Christmas gifts, I called them, or help with life, as Austin had termed them. That was $225,000 in help that never required repayment and never came with gratitude. He had accepted each transfer with a casual entitlement, never acknowledging the strain it put on my budget. The irony burned in my throat. Austin was now offering me back 1 year's worth of what I had freely given him for over a decade. Wandering back to the living room, I calculated the housing costs. Austin had lived in this house rent-free until age 35. The market rate for this neighborhood was about $3,200 per month, which meant that 12 years of free housing was about $460,800. If I added in utilities, maintenance, food, and car insurance I had paid until he turned 30, the numbers kept climbing in my head. College tuition, $180,000. Business investment, $75,000. Annual gifts, $225,000. Free housing and expenses, roughly $500,000. Conservatively estimated, I had invested nearly $1 million in Austin's life and future. His gratitude for all of this was to steal my home and offer me pocket change for my exile. I crushed the check in my fist, then smoothed it out again on the coffee table. The paper crinkled like dried leaves, the ink smearing slightly from my sweaty palm. For 3 decades, I had treated Austin like the son every father dreams of raising. I had given him opportunities, education, financial security, and unconditional support. In return, he had repaid me by treating me like an inconvenient expense to be eliminated. The house felt different now, smaller and emptier, already belonging to strangers. Every piece of furniture held memories of sacrifice. The second-hand couch I had bought because Austin needed college money, the old television I had kept for years because his tuition took priority, the worn carpet I had never replaced because his business needed funding. Standing up, I walked to the window where I had watched their BMW disappear. They were probably at some expensive restaurant right now, celebrating their clever solution to the Roger problem. Sarah was likely congratulating Austin on his business acumen as they toasted with wine that cost more than my weekly grocery budget. They had no idea what they had just awakened. They had no idea about the 3 decades of building something they couldn't comprehend, the 3 decades of strategic patience they had never suspected, or the 3 decades of careful planning they had never bothered to investigate. Austin thought he was discarding a helpless old man, and Sarah believed she was disposing of an inconvenient burden. Neither of them realized they had just declared war on someone who had been quietly building an empire while they slept. Walking toward my home office, I felt something shift inside me. Not just anger anymore, but something colder, more calculating. They thought they had caught me completely off guard, but they had no idea I had been expecting this betrayal for exactly 1 week. The memory surfaced with crystal clarity. It had been April 8th, and I was in my kitchen making dinner when Austin's voice drifted through the thin walls. He was on the living room couch, phone pressed to his ear, speaking in that conspiratorial whisper people use when they think they're alone. He told Sarah I wouldn't see it coming. He said I was completely clueless about my own situation. I had frozen mid-chop, the onion forgotten on my cutting board. Getting rid of me was the smart move, he continued, so they could take the house, set me up somewhere cheap, and finally stop this ridiculous burden. He said I was becoming dead weight. My own son was discussing my disposal like a piece of unwanted furniture. He told her I would be grateful in the end, once he framed it as helping me simplify my life. His laugh was cold and calculating. He said $15,000 should keep me quiet since it was more money than I had probably seen in years. The knife had trembled in my hand as Sarah's voice crackled through the speaker, though I couldn't make out her words. He told her that once they got power of attorney, they could clean up my messy finances and that there was no telling what other debts I was hiding. The house sale would close next week, and they would present it as a done deal, give me a token payment, and move me out before I could cause any problems. That night, I had barely slept, but by morning, I knew exactly what I had to do. On April 10th, James Chen's law office smelled like leather and old books. It was exactly the kind of place where serious business got handled quietly. I had called him first thing that morning, and he had squeezed me in between other appointments. He leaned forward across his mahogany desk, his expression concerned, and asked me what was going on since I had sounded upset on the phone. I told him I needed to protect my assets from family interference. The words came out steadier than I felt, and I explained that someone close to me was planning to take advantage of what they thought was my financial vulnerability. James raised an eyebrow but didn't ask for specifics, which was exactly why I had trusted him for 15 years. He asked me what kind of protection I was thinking of, and I told him I wanted a complete separation. I wanted my business holdings legally shielded from any claims, inheritance disputes, or power of attorney attempts. I then pulled out the folder I had prepared and told him that everything needed to be bulletproof. For 2 hours, we had worked through documentation, asset protection, trusts, business ownership, and verification, creating clear legal barriers to prevent family members from accessing or claiming any part of my holdings. James had been thorough, professional, and discreet. He explained that this would create an impenetrable wall around my primary assets, and that no one could touch my business empire or personal holdings without my explicit consent. Even family members would have to go through multiple legal challenges that would take years and cost them more than they could ever recover. I had signed everything with steady hands, knowing I was building a fortress they would never breach. James had asked if there was anything else I needed to discuss, clearly sensing there was more to the story. I told him not yet, but that I might need his services again soon. Now, standing in my home office on the evening of April 15th, I pulled out the legal documents James had prepared. Every page was perfect, and every protection was airtight. Austin and Sarah thought they were dealing with a helpless old man with no resources and no options. They had no idea they had just declared war on someone who owned 47 profitable businesses across California, someone who had spent decades building an empire while they slept, and someone who had anticipated their betrayal and prepared accordingly. The irony was delicious. While Austin struggled with bank loans and business debts, while Sarah plotted to steal what she thought were my meager possessions, I sat on assets worth more than they could imagine. I would begin teaching them a lesson the very next day, and I intended to spend the night carefully planning their education. The gray, determined dawn perfectly matched my mood. I had finally slept better than I had in weeks, my mind now clear on the path forward. After 3 decades of building my empire in secret, I knew it was time to reveal it, but I would do so with a strategic approach. By 7:30 a.m., I had put on my best navy suit, the one I reserved for serious business meetings. Austin probably thought my wardrobe consisted of nothing but jeans and old work shirts. Today, he would begin to learn just how much he didn't know about his own father. The morning traffic made the drive to First National a quick 20 minutes. I had deliberately chosen this bank because it was the same one where Austin had boasted about getting his business loan 2 years earlier. At that celebratory dinner, he had mentioned the manager's name, the loan amount, and even the payment schedule, information I had mentally filed away without him even noticing. As I approached the marble counter, the receptionist's face lit up with genuine warmth, greeting me by name. She said it was wonderful to see me, and asked if I was there for a deposit or if I wanted to discuss my accounts. My car wash businesses had been clients of this bank for 15 years. With weekly deposits ranging from $50,000 to $70,000 per location, I had the kind of relationship that opened doors quickly. I told her I needed to speak with Mr. Harrison about a family matter, and asked if he was available. She replied that he was, and her fingers flew across the keyboard to check his schedule. She confirmed that he could see me in 10 minutes and offered me coffee. The scent of expensive leather and success filled Harrison's office. Awards lined the walls, along with photos of him with local business leaders and certificates of banking excellence. This was clearly the kind of office where serious financial decisions were made every day. Harrison stood to greet me with a handshake, his warmth reserved for major clients. He asked me what brought me in and if everything was all right with the car wash accounts. I assured him the business accounts were fine and that I was there to discuss a personal matter involving my son. I told him I believed Austin had a loan with his institution. Harrison's expression became cautious, and he reminded me that he couldn't discuss specific customer information. I explained that I wasn't asking for details, but was there as a concerned father and, more importantly, as a long-standing client of the bank. I told him that just the day before, my son had informed me he had sold my house without my knowledge. He had offered me $15,000 as compensation for what he called my burden. The banker's eyebrows rose in response, and he said that sounded concerning. I explained that Austin believed I was a poor retiree with no assets or business connections. He had been systematically planning to eliminate what he saw as his financial responsibility towards me. I kept my voice steady and professional. I told him I was worried about what this behavior said about his character and business judgment. Harrison's expression grew more serious as he pulled something up on his computer. He told me that character was certainly a factor they considered in their ongoing lending relationships. I pointed out that I had banked there for 15 years, maintaining substantial business accounts and building relationships based on trust and mutual respect. I then explained that my son, on the other hand, appeared to view family obligations as inconvenient expenses that could be eliminated through deception. Harrison agreed that these were serious concerns, and his fingers drummed on his desk, especially given some recent irregularities in the account I had mentioned. I felt a surge of satisfaction, realizing Austin's financial troubles were worse than I had suspected. I asked what he would recommend from a business perspective. I inquired how such disregard for family obligations and a willingness to deceive and manipulate might reflect on a person's business dealings. Harrison remained silent for a long moment, studying his computer screen. He explained that character assessments were part of their risk management protocols, especially when borrowers demonstrated patterns of deceptive behavior or financial irresponsibility. I stood up and straightened my tie, telling him I understood completely. I said I had simply wanted to share my concerns as both a father and a valued client. I concluded by saying that whatever decisions he made regarding his lending policies were entirely his professional judgment. Harrison also stood, his expression thoughtful, telling me he appreciated me bringing this to his attention. He asked if he could ask a few follow-up questions about my son's recent behavior patterns. For the next 20 minutes, I gave him a calm and factual account of Austin's actions. It was not an emotional appeal or dramatic manipulation, but a strategic, professional conversation between two businessmen discussing risk assessment. Harrison finally thanked me for the information. He told me he would need to review their lending policies regarding Austin's account, explaining that it was standard procedure. I said of course, and that I trusted his professional judgment completely. As I shook his hand goodbye, I could see the wheels turning in his mind. I knew Austin's loan would be getting very close scrutiny very soon. Walking back to my car, I felt the first genuine satisfaction I had experienced in days. Austin thought he was dealing with a helpless old man. Instead, he had just declared war on someone who knew exactly how to use legitimate business relationships to achieve justice. By tomorrow, he would receive his first lesson in the difference between the two. I spent the next 3 days nicely occupied with gardening and household maintenance while I waited for the inevitable. On Friday afternoon, I saw Austin's Honda pull into my driveway, and I watched from my kitchen window with the satisfaction of a chess player who had just seen their opponent make the predicted move. This time he knocked. His voice, when he called to me, was devoid of the arrogance from our last encounter. He asked if we could talk. I opened the door to find a different man than the one who had delivered my eviction notice. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, his expensive shirt was wrinkled, and dark circles shadowed his eyes. The confident businessman had been replaced by someone who looked like he hadn't slept in days. I stepped aside and calmly invited him in, using the same tone I would for any visitor. Austin settled onto the same couch where he had once smugly explained my disposal. Now he fidgeted with his wedding ring, his leg bouncing nervously. He rubbed his face with both hands and told me he had received a call from the bank on Tuesday. He said they wanted the full loan amount immediately, which was $200,000. I raised my eyebrows in mild surprise, remarking that it seemed unusual. Austin's voice cracked slightly as he told me they had expressed concerns about his character and business judgment. He said they were demanding repayment within 30 days or they would begin foreclosure proceedings on his office building. Character concerns, I said, my tone still neutral. He explained that the expansion he had told me about last year, the new equipment and the premium office space in downtown San Jose, was supposed to triple their revenue. Austin's words tumbled out faster now as he admitted that he had leveraged everything. He explained that the monthly payments were manageable when clients were paying on time, but 3 major contracts had fallen through in February. He stood up and paced to the window, the same one where he had once watched me receive his $15,000 insult. He said he had sold everything he could. His Rolex, Sarah's jewelry, and his vintage guitars. He had even traded his BMW for a basic Honda. He gave a bitter laugh, saying he had raised about $30,000 but was still $170,000 short. The irony of the situation was exquisite. Austin had calculated my worth at $15,000, and now he needed more than 10 times that amount to save himself. He then dropped his voice to a whisper, telling me Sarah was talking about leaving him. She had told him she didn't sign up to be married to a failure who couldn't even keep a roof over their heads. She had given him until the end of the month to fix the problem or she would file for divorce. I watched him crumble, this man who had called me a burden just days ago. That's unfortunate, I said. Austin turned back to face me, desperation stark in his eyes, telling me he knew he had hurt me with how he had handled the house situation. He said he now realized he had been insensitive about my feelings. Insensitive? As if stealing my home was merely a social misstep. He asked for my help, saying he knew I didn't have much, but if I could loan him whatever I could manage, he would pay me back with interest. He said he would put it in writing and make it legal whatever I wanted. The silence between us stretched like a chasm while Austin waited, hope flickering in his expression as he searched my face for any sign of sympathy. My no was flat and final. Austin blinked in surprise. I told him I didn't have the resources to help him with this kind of financial crisis. I stood up, smoothing down my shirt. As he had recently pointed out, I was just a poor retiree living on Social Security, and $15,000 was more money than I had seen in years. The color drained from Austin's face as his own words came back to haunt him. He pleaded with me to understand. I walked toward the front door, my movements making it clear the conversation was over, and I told him I understood perfectly. I explained that he was in the exact same position he had put me in 3 days ago. I added that the only difference was that no one was offering him pocket change to ease the transition. Austin followed me to the door, his composure finally cracking completely. He pleaded with me, telling me I was his father and the only person who might be able to help him. I opened the door, and the cool afternoon air flowed into the house. I reminded him that he had made it very clear that our relationship was a business transaction, and he had terminated it. I told him he would need to find business solutions elsewhere. He pleaded again. I told him goodbye. He stood in the doorway for another moment, perhaps hoping I would change my mind, perhaps realizing for the first time that actions have consequences. He then walked to his modest Honda, started the engine, and drove away. I closed the door and went back to my kitchen window, watching until his car disappeared around the corner. After 2 days of watching Austin's Honda drive past my house twice a day, probably hoping for some sign of forgiveness, I was convinced it was time for the next lesson. Sunday afternoon seemed like the perfect time for a field trip. I called him at noon and asked him if he would like to take a drive with me, telling him there was something I wanted to show him. His voice was filled with desperate hope, and he immediately agreed. 30 minutes later, Austin was sitting in my passenger seat as we drove toward the industrial district on the south side of San Jose. He kept stealing glances at me, probably wondering if this meant reconciliation was possible. He asked where we were going as we turned onto Commerce Boulevard. I just told him he would see. The large blue sign was the first thing to come into view. It read, Young's Premium Car Wash, family-owned since 1995. Austin's eyes widened as he read it, and then he looked at me with a confused expression. He started to say something about someone with our last name, but I gently interrupted as I pulled into the manager's parking space. I told him there wasn't. Marcus Rodriguez, my site manager for the past 8 years, approached my car with his usual professional smile. He told me it was good to see me and asked if everything was running smoothly. Austin's mouth fell open as Marcus addressed me with obvious familiarity and respect. I told Marcus that everything looked excellent and that this was my son, Austin. I was going to give him a tour of the operation. Marcus said it was wonderful and told Austin that I had built something really special there. We were processing about 400 cars daily now. 400 cars at an average of $25 per wash meant $10,000 in daily revenue from that location alone. Austin's brain, like a calculator, was obviously working overtime. As we walked toward the facility entrance, the operation hummed with efficient precision. 8 wash bays operated at the same time. Conveyor systems moved vehicles through automated processes while teams of employees handled detailing and customer service. Electronic displays showed real-time revenue tracking, customer satisfaction scores, and equipment performance metrics. Austin could only say that this was impressive as he watched a luxury sedan emerge spotless from a wash bay. I calmly explained that we had been perfecting the process for 3 decades. I had started with 1 location in 1995, added 2 more by 2000, and then expanded systematically across the Bay Area. Austin stopped walking and asked how many locations I had expanded to. I pulled out my phone, opening the business management app that tracked all 47 sites in real time. Revenue numbers, customer counts, and operational status were all displayed in neat columns of data. I told him there were 47 locations, from San Francisco to San Diego, with concentrations in every major metropolitan area. I handed him the phone and told him that each one generated between $7,000 and $12,000 daily, depending on the location and season. Austin stared at the screen, his face pale as he scrolled through the financial summary. The daily network revenue was $423,000, with monthly totals in the millions and annual gross revenue approaching $50 million. He asked in a whisper if I owned all of them. I had built them one at a time over 30 years. I had never taken on investors or borrowed beyond the initial equipment. The financing was paid off within 18 months for each location. I retrieved my phone, closing the app with the same casual motion I used to check the weather. He asked me how I had done it, saying I had always seemed a certain way, but his words trailed off as the magnitude of the revelation hit him. Seemed what? I asked. Poor? Struggling? I gestured toward the bustling operation around us. I had dressed simply, driven modest cars, and lived in the same house for decades. None of that had prevented me from building this. Austin leaned against a concrete pillar, looking as if he might be sick. He said that when he had asked me for help with the $200,000, I could have written that check without even thinking about it. I confirmed that I could have. I told him I could have written 10 such checks, or even 20 if necessary. The silence stretched between us as Austin processed his discovery. The man he had dismissed as a burden, the poor retiree he had planned to relegate to budget housing, was his father, who owned a business empire worth tens of millions of dollars. He whispered, asking me why I had never told him. I simply asked him why I would have. I pointed out that he had never asked about my work or shown any interest in my life beyond what I could provide for his. I explained that he had assumed I was poor based on my appearance and had used that assumption to justify treating me as an inconvenience. Austin's legs seemed to give out, and he slid down the pillar until he was sitting on the concrete with his head in his hands. He finally said that he needed to get home to think. Of course, I said as I started walking toward the car. I told Marcus we would be leaving, and to keep up the excellent work. He said it was always a pleasure, and told Austin it was nice meeting him. Austin followed me to the car like a sleepwalker, barely responding to Marcus's farewell. During the drive home, he stared out the window in complete silence, occasionally shaking his head as if he were trying to wake up from a dream. When I dropped him off at his house, he paused with his hand on the door handle. He tried to say something, but I interrupted him, telling him there was nothing to say right now. I told him to go home to Sarah, explain what he had learned, and then decide what he wanted to do with the information. Tuesday morning, Austin returned to my door, but this time he carried himself differently. The desperate man from last week was gone. In his place was a man who believed he had found a new angle. He began by telling me he had been thinking about our conversation, and he settled into my living room with renewed confidence. He admitted that he had approached me the wrong way, saying he had been asking for charity when he should have been proposing a business relationship. I poured myself some coffee and listened with apparent interest. He said that I had built something incredible over 30 years and that he now respected that. His entrepreneurial enthusiasm returned as he leaned forward. He explained that he didn't need a handout, but rather an introduction to my network, business relationships, and strategic partnerships. I asked if he wanted me to make introductions, and he agreed, specifying successful people, investors, and business leaders. He said that if I could arrange a few meetings, he could properly present his expansion plans. He believed his company had solid fundamentals and that he just needed the right capital partner. His request was reasonable, logical, and exactly what I had anticipated. I told him I supposed I could arrange something and that I would make a few calls. By Thursday afternoon, I had scheduled lunch with David Chun, James's brother, who ran a successful investment firm. Austin dressed carefully for the meeting, carrying a polished presentation folder and exuding the confidence of someone who believed his luck was finally changing. As we sat down at the exclusive downtown restaurant David preferred, I told him I would like to introduce him to my son, Austin. I reminded him that Austin was the one with the consulting business I had mentioned. David shook Austin's hand warmly and told him that I spoke very highly of his business acumen. He then asked Austin to tell him about his company. Austin launched into his pitch with practiced enthusiasm, discussing revenue projections, market analysis, and expansion strategies. He presented everything professionally and persuasively. David listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions about scalability and competitive advantages. During a natural pause, David said it sounded promising and that I must be proud of Austin's entrepreneurial spirit. I replied that I was, and that Austin had always been focused on financial success. I then carefully set down my coffee cup. I told David that I should mention Austin had recently demonstrated remarkable business discipline by making the difficult decision to sell his father's house to optimize his cash flow position. Austin's face went pale, but I continued in the same conversational tone. I explained that he had offered me $15,000 for a property worth $400,000, and had told me that someone in my financial position should be grateful for such generosity. I said it was quite strategic thinking, as it maximized asset extraction while minimizing cost exposure. David's expression shifted from interest to concern. He repeated that Austin had sold my house. I explained that Austin viewed our relationship through a purely business lens, seeing family obligations as burdens to be minimized and elderly parents as expensive liabilities. I smiled at Austin, whose confidence was visibly deflating. I asked David if it didn't show a certain ruthless business mindset. The lunch ended politely, but without any investment offer. David cited alignment concerns and cultural fit issues before making his excuses to leave early. On Friday, I had a similar meeting with Patricia Williams, who owned a chain of tech incubators. Again, Austin pitched professionally, and again, I waited for the right moment to share some context about his character. During dessert, I told Patricia that Austin certainly understood cost-benefit analysis. I said he had calculated that caring for an aging father was financially inefficient, and so he had developed a solution to eliminate that expense entirely. Patricia's eyebrows rose at the word eliminate. I explained that when Austin discovered his father was becoming what he called dead weight, he arranged to relocate him to budget housing on the outskirts of town. I commented that it was a clever way to reallocate resources. Patricia declined to schedule a follow-up meeting. By the following Tuesday, Austin had begun to recognize the pattern. Each meeting started promisingly and then deteriorated after I shared the family context. Each potential partner lost interest once they understood Austin's approach to family obligations. After our third failed introduction, Austin told me we needed to talk. His voice had an edge to it that I had never heard before. Suspicion mixed with growing desperation. Of course. How can I help? Are you telling these people things specifically to sabotage me? I looked genuinely puzzled. I'm sharing relevant character information. These are business relationships built on trust. Austin. People want to know who they're dealing with. But the way you tell it makes me sound like someone who treats family members as business expenses to be optimized. I shrugged. Austin, I'm simply describing your actual behavior. If that creates concerns for potential partners, perhaps the issue isn't my storytelling. Austin stared at me, the full realization finally crystallizing. His father wasn't helping him network. He was systematically destroying every opportunity. Friday evening brought Austin to my door again, but this time I barely recognized the man standing on my porch. The confident entrepreneur had been replaced by someone who looked like he'd aged 10 years in 3 days. His clothes hung loose, his eyes were bloodshot, and his hands shook as he raised them to knock. Dad! His voice cracked on the single word. Can I come in? I have nowhere else to go. I stepped aside wordlessly, watching him shuffle into my living room like a wounded animal seeking shelter. He collapsed onto the couch where he'd once sat, smugly planning my exile, now broken and hollow. Sarah filed for divorce yesterday. The words tumbled out without preamble. She said she couldn't watch me destroy everything we'd built together. Couldn't stand being married to someone who'd lost everything because he was too proud to maintain family relationships. I poured myself a glass of water and listened. She took the last of our joint savings for a security deposit on her own apartment. Said she needed to protect herself financially before I dragged her down completely. Austin's laugh was bitter and broken. 22 years together. Since college. She was my best friend, my partner, my everything. And she walked away like I was a stranger. That must be difficult. Difficult. Austin looked up at me with hollow eyes. Dad. She was the only person who knew me completely. The only person who supported my dreams, who believed in my potential. Now she looks at me like I'm some kind of failure she's embarrassed to have been associated with. He stood and walked to the window, staring out at the darkening street. It's not just Sarah. Everyone's gone. His voice dropped to a whisper. My business partner terminated our agreement yesterday. Said my reputation issues were creating liability for the company. My assistant quit without giving notice. Even my accountant stopped returning my calls. I remained silent, watching him process the full extent of his isolation. You know what the worst part is? The friends. People I've known for 15 years. People who came to my wedding, who celebrated every business success with me, they're all suddenly too busy to take my calls. Austin pressed his forehead against the glass. I realized none of them were actually my friends. They were networking contacts who enjoyed associating with success. Social relationships often have transactional elements. Austin turned back to face me, desperation stark in his expression. Marcus Chun, David's nephew. Remember him? We played golf every month for 5 years. Yesterday, I ran into him at the grocery store. He pretended not to see me, Dad. Literally turned around and walked the other way rather than acknowledge I existed. The silence stretched between us. Austin's breathing was ragged, emotional exhaustion evident in every line of his body. I went to Jake Morrison's birthday party last weekend. You remember Jake? We were roommates in college, best man at each other's weddings. When I walked in, the entire conversation stopped. 20 people just stared at me like I was some kind of contagious disease. Austin's voice broke completely. Jake pulled me aside after 5 minutes and asked me to leave. Said my presence was making his other guests uncomfortable. I watched my son crumble. This man who'd once dismissed me as dead weight, now experiencing what true isolation felt like. I don't understand what happened to my life. Austin slumped back onto the couch, head in his hands. 3 weeks ago, I had everything. A successful business, a loving wife, a social circle, respect in the community. Now I have nothing. Less than nothing. You have this house for tonight. Austin looked up at me with something approaching hope. Dad, I know I treated you terribly. I know I made horrible mistakes about who you were and what you meant to me. I'm not asking for money or business help. I just need someone to talk to. Someone who remembers when I wasn't a complete failure. The desperation in his voice was absolute. This was no longer the arrogant son demanding his inheritance or the desperate businessman seeking investment connections. This was a broken human being who'd lost every relationship that mattered to him, sitting alone with the father he'd betrayed. I'm listening, I said finally. Monday evening brought a different Austin to my door. Not the arrogant businessman from weeks ago. Not the desperate supplicant seeking money. Not even the broken man confessing his losses. This Austin stood on my threshold with something I hadn't seen from him in 30 years. Genuine humility. Dad, I know I have no right to ask anything from you, he began, his voice steady but quiet. I'm not here for money or help or business connections. I just want to apologize. Really apologize. And maybe ask if there's any way you could forgive me. I stepped aside, letting him enter the living room where our relationship had been destroyed and might possibly be rebuilt. Austin remained standing as if sitting would presume too much familiarity. I've been thinking for 3 days straight about everything I did wrong. Not just recently, but for years, decades even. He looked directly at me, no longer avoiding eye contact as he had during previous visits. I treated you like you were my employee instead of my father. When you sacrificed to send me to Stanford, I acted like you owed me that education. When you gave me money for my business, I treated it like an investment I deserved rather than a gift from someone who'd love me. I sat down but said nothing, watching him struggle with words he'd never spoken before. The house, that was the worst thing I've ever done. Austin's voice cracked slightly. You raised me in that house. You kept it perfect for 30 years, maintained every detail, made it a home, and I sold it without even asking your opinion, let alone your permission. He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I remembered from his childhood when he was trying to process something difficult. I called you dead weight, Dad. I actually used those words to describe my own father to Sarah, the man who worked 16-hour days so I could have music lessons and sports teams and college prep courses. Austin's composure finally broke. You were never a burden. You were the best father anyone could ask for, and I was too selfish and arrogant to see it. The silence stretched between us. Austin waited, not pushing for a response, seemingly prepared for rejection. I lost everything because I deserved to lose everything, he continued. Finally, Sarah left because she realized she was married to someone who could treat his own father like an inconvenience. My friends disappeared because they saw who I really was underneath the success. My business failed because I was too proud to maintain the relationships that mattered. Austin moved closer, not sitting, but kneeling beside my chair, a posture I hadn't seen since he was 8 years old and had broken my favorite lamp. I don't want your money. I don't want your business connections. I don't even want you to fix my problems. His eyes were bright with tears. He wasn't trying to hide. I just want my dad back. I want the chance to be the son you deserve to have all along. He reached into his pocket and pulled out something I recognized. The $15,000 check he'd given me, now wrinkled and worn. I kept this as a reminder of the worst moment of my life. Not losing Sarah or the business or the friends. This moment. When I tried to buy off my father's love with pocket change. Austin placed the check on the coffee table between us. I understand now that no amount of money could repay what I owe you. Not for the sacrifices, not for the love, and definitely not for the pain I caused. I looked at the check, then at my son kneeling beside my chair like a penitent seeking absolution. I know I have to earn your forgiveness, Austin whispered. I know it might take years, or maybe it's impossible. But if you'll let me try, I'll spend the rest of my life proving that I understand what family really means. The room was quiet except for the ticking of the antique clock Austin had always complained was too loud. Now he waited in that silence, not demanding an answer, not pushing for immediate reconciliation, just hoping for the possibility of redemption. I studied his face, looking for any sign of manipulation or self-serving motivation. All I saw was a broken man who'd finally learned the difference between success and worth, between taking and giving, between entitlement and gratitude. Wednesday morning, I made my decision. After studying Austin's face for 2 full days, watching him return each evening just to sit quietly in my living room without asking for anything, I concluded his transformation might be genuine. I'm going to offer you something, I said over coffee. Not charity, not a handout, an opportunity to prove you've actually changed. Austin looked up from his untouched breakfast, hope flickering cautiously in his eyes. I need someone at the Sunnyvale location for basic maintenance and cleaning. $6 above minimum wage, full 8-hour days. You'll be working under Marcus, taking instructions from employees who know the business better than you do. I'll take it. The response was immediate, without negotiation or questions about the work details. 1-week trial. If you prove you can handle honest work with the right attitude, we'll discuss whether this arrangement continues. Austin nodded, understanding this was a test rather than employment. We drove to the car wash in relative silence, both of us aware that this week would determine whether our relationship had any future. Marcus showed Austin to the equipment room, explaining his responsibilities: sanitizing vacuum stations, restocking supply dispensers, maintaining tire shine applicators, and general facility cleaning. Nothing glamorous, nothing requiring business acumen or strategic thinking, just honest physical labor. The first day was brutal. Austin struggled with the industrial vacuum systems, fumbled with chemical mixing ratios, and moved with the inefficiency of someone unaccustomed to manual work. By lunch, his designer polo shirt was soaked with sweat and spotted with cleaning solution stains. "Your hands are soft," observed Maria, one of our detail specialists, during the afternoon break. "You've never done this kind of work before." "No, I haven't," Austin admitted without embarrassment. "I need to learn. Could you show me the proper technique for applying the protectant solution?" Maria's eyebrows rose at his respectful request for instruction from someone he would have previously dismissed as staff. She spent 20 minutes demonstrating proper application methods while Austin listened attentively and practiced until he got it right. Thursday brought improvement. Austin arrived 15 minutes early wearing work clothes he'd purchased the previous evening. His movements were more efficient, his technique cleaner. When a customer complained about water spots on their luxury sedan, Austin apologized professionally and personally redetailed the affected areas without being asked. That was well handled, I mentioned during our brief encounter at the office computer. The customer deserved better service than they received, Austin replied simply. It was my responsibility to fix it. Friday afternoon, the regional manager from our corporate accounts made an unexpected visit. Austin was cleaning windows when the manager approached him with questions about our service capabilities for fleet vehicles. Instead of deferring to management or pretending knowledge he didn't possess, Austin politely explained his role and located Marcus to provide proper information. He remained helpful without overstepping boundaries or trying to impress with connections to ownership. New employee seems solid, the manager mentioned to Marcus later. Professional attitude, knows his place, handles customers well. Marcus agreed. He works hard, doesn't complain, takes instruction without attitude problems. Good addition to the team. Saturday brought our busiest day with 3 separate wedding parties scheduling premium detail services. Austin volunteered for overtime hours, working alongside teams to ensure every vehicle met our standards. He spent extra time on tire detailing, interior conditioning, and final quality inspections. You're getting the hang of this, said Carlos, our lead detailer, as they finished the last car. Your dad taught us all to take pride in the work. Looks like you're learning that too. Austin paused, towel in hand, processing the comment. He's a good teacher. I just wasn't ready to learn before. By week's end, Austin had transformed from struggling amateur to competent team member. His hands were calloused, his movements efficient, his attitude consistently professional. More importantly, he displayed genuine respect for the work and the people who did it daily. Friday evening, as we cleaned up after the last customer, Austin approached me with something I hadn't seen in years. Quiet pride and accomplishment earned through effort. Thank you for this week, he said simply. I learned more than just car care techniques. I watched my son secure equipment and check supply levels with the same attention to detail he'd once applied to business spreadsheets. The arrogant executive was gone, replaced by someone who understood the dignity of honest work and the value of earning respect. Sunday afternoon, as Austin cleaned the last vacuum station with the same care he'd shown all week, I made the final decision. Justice had been served, transformation had been proven, and it was time for complete honesty. There's something important we need to discuss, I said as he finished organizing the supply room. I've asked James Chun to meet us at his office this afternoon. There are some family business matters to resolve. Austin nodded without question, his trust now complete. During the drive to James' office, he sat quietly, no longer demanding explanations or trying to control situations beyond his understanding. James greeted us with the warmth of someone who had witnessed our entire journey. Roger, Austin. I have the documents prepared as we discussed. Before we address legal matters, I said, settling into the familiar leather chair across from James' desk. Austin needs to understand the complete truth about everything that's happened. Austin's expression grew attentive, but unworried. The week of honest work had given him confidence that whatever came next, he could handle it. The bank pressure on your loan wasn't coincidental, I began. I initiated that review through my relationship with Harrison. When you sold my house and called me dead weight, I decided you needed to learn some difficult lessons about character and consequences. Austin's eyes widened, but he remained silent, processing this revelation. Every business meeting I arranged was designed to fail. I shared your family behavior with potential investors, specifically to destroy your networking opportunities. The social isolation you experienced was the natural result of people understanding who you really were. You orchestrated everything. Austin's voice carried wonder rather than anger. I planned your education, I corrected. The man who walked into my house 3 weeks ago was selfish, entitled, and cruel. The man sitting here today understands the value of honest work, the importance of family, and the difference between success and character. James watched our exchange with professional discretion. Having prepared for this moment through multiple conversations about family reconciliation and business planning. "I needed to lose everything," Austin said slowly, understanding dawning in his expression. "The business, Sarah, the friends, the social status. None of it was real. It was all built on money and connections rather than character." "Exactly. And now that you understand the difference, we can discuss your actual inheritance." James pushed a folder across his desk. "Austin, your father has restructured his will and business holdings. Instead of simple inheritance, he's offering you partnership in the car wash operations." Austin opened the folder, scanning documents that outlined a gradual ownership transfer based on performance and character demonstration over the next 5 years. "You'll start as operations manager for the Northern California region," I explained. 15 locations generating approximately $2 million annually. "If you prove you can handle the responsibility with the same integrity you showed this week, we'll expand your role." Austin's voice broke slightly. I don't know what to say. After everything I did." "You've earned this opportunity," I interrupted. "Not through inheritance or entitlement, but through genuine character change." The man who kneeled beside my chair asking for forgiveness, who worked humbly alongside employees he once would have dismissed. That man deserves a chance to build something meaningful. Austin studied the partnership documents, understanding that this wasn't charity, but an opportunity to prove himself on a larger scale. "James helped me establish protections, ensuring you can't simply inherit wealth without earning it," I continued. "Every advancement requires demonstrated competence and character. You'll build your financial security the same way I did, through hard work and smart decisions." "This is more than I deserve," Austin whispered. "It's exactly what you deserve now that you understand the difference between taking and earning." I stood up, extending my hand to my son. "Welcome to the family business, partner." Austin rose and clasped my hand, then pulled me into the first genuine embrace we'd shared in decades. "Thank you for loving me enough to teach me these lessons, even when I didn't want to learn them. Thank you for becoming the man I always knew you could be." James smiled as he witnessed the completion of the most unusual family reconciliation of his career. "Shall we sign these partnership agreements?" As Austin picked up the pen to formalize our new beginning, I felt the satisfaction of perfect justice achieved through love rather than revenge. The arrogant son was gone forever, replaced by a man worthy of the young family name. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of the story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.